Hello friends and welcome to this video on Authentic English. I'm so sorry, I know I kind of abandoned this channel. There were no uploads for a very long time and you see life goes on. Like I started this channel back when I was in class 12. I had this passion to teach English. I have actually completed my masters in English now. I'm hoping to get into PhD and I'm also working, right? So like there's a lot going on with life, and as you grow up you see that life does not remain that linear trajectory that you think it would be when you are in school. It's actually a mess, right? So yeah, personal affairs, life in general is what kept me away from this channel for so long. But very fortunately I have big plans for 2025. I hope to be able to revive this channel, bring back great quality videos that will help not just school students but also net aspirants crack their exams and anybody who's interested in English literature and understanding its nuances. So without further ado, let's begin with this video. I'll call it the first video on this channel because it's practically the first video after like 2 years. And I know like I have kind of deceived my subscribers and I apologize for that. I take full responsibility for not being able to do what I intended to do. I wanted this channel to be a repository of everything that there is in English literature. But I hope that from this year onwards I can actually take baby steps towards this big mammoth like goal. And I just want you guys to support me again if you think it's worth it. Okay, I will not ask you to subscribe right away. I will not ask you to like this video right away. Watch it, see what follows. If you think it's worth it, if you think that my pace of uploading videos, which you will be able to judge in the coming days, is something that you like, we can definitely kind of begin. So this is a video on William Wordsworth. This video aims to give you a short capsule like summary of everything that there is to know about William Wordsworth, which is aimed at helping you revise for your net examination and also like for your exams in general, right? So let's begin. Okay, so let's begin with William Wordsworth's life. Wordsworth was born on April 7, 1770, Cockermouth, Cumberland, in the Lake District of England. So this is kind of important that he was one of the lake poets, like if you heard this term. So Wordsworth was one of the prominent lake poets. He lost his parents in his childhood and was sent to a grammar school in Hoxton. Sitting by the lakes, Wordsworth realized both the terror and beauty of nature, which was later captured in his poems. So the two prominent themes that we see in his in fact the most prominent theme is nature, and he captures both its terror and beauty in his poetry, right? After his graduation from St. John's College, Cambridge, Wordsworth went on a tour of Europe, witnessing the French Revolution and staring amongst the common people of France informed his empathetic lens towards the human condition. It was with Samuel Taylor Coleridge that Wordsworth wrote Lyrical Ballads, which led to the beginning of what scholars call the English Romanticism. Wordsworth was the Poet Laureate of England from 1793 until his death in 1850. So this is not going to be a very long video where I get into everything in detail. This is more for the sake of revision and more for the sake of covering the most important points that need to be there at the back of your mind when you are attempting an examination. But there are a few pointers that I would like to go over. One is the impact of French Revolution. This is something that you should study about, how the French Revolution actually impacted Wordsworth, right, and his poetry. This is something that a lot of critics have worked on, how the French ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity, but then its destruction, its subsequent destruction, shaped Wordsworth's poetry, right? And then something very important to remember, and I think most of you know, that he's considered to be one of the fathers of Romanticism, right? Because when he published the Lyrical Ballads, right, in 1798, there were a lot of poems in that, and that is where like English Romanticism kind of began. So these are some important pointers to note. Let's move on to the next slide. Some additional facts about Wordsworth. Wordsworth met Coleridge in 1795 and they published Lyrical Ballads in 1798. The collection included popular poems such as Coleridge's The Rime of Ancient Mariner and Wordsworth's Tintern Abbey. Right, so these are some of the most popular poems from the collection. His epic autobiographical poem, The Prelude, was originally published in 1850. So, The Prelude, which is considered to be his magnum opus, was published in 1850. So, that is published when he is in his prime of life. It was not published early on, like a lot of his other poems, right? And it captured the growth of a poet's mind, right? He refused to publish it during his lifetime. His wife published it after his death. So, it was published posthumously. And like it captures like the growth that he felt his mind went through over the course of his life. So the Prelude is kind of it's a very long poem and it's very different from what his earlier works were. In France, he had an affair and a child with Annette Wallen, but later married his childhood friend Mary Hutchinson. He had 5 children but lost 2 of them. In 1794, he was reunited with his sister Dorothy, who was his lifelong friend, confidant, and also the muse for many of his poems. So this is something that is very important to remember, that Dorothy is somebody whom he addresses in a lot of poems, right? So it's like they were separated and then like they got reunited together in 1794, and he was his sister was a very important person in his life. The following few years were difficult for Wordsworth when Dorothy had a series of mental breakdowns. He lost 2 of his children and his brother drowned at sea. But he became a prominent literary figure by 1812. So he's seen quite a lot of hardships in his life, and that is what probably we see in some of his poetry too, right? The reflection of the misery of the human condition and the bittersweet nature of life. Okay, so let's talk about a bit on his poetic style. Wordsworth's poems are characterized by simplicity in theme and language, yet are rich in emotional depth. Nature is both a source of inspiration and comfort for him. So, a lot of his poetry finds comfort in nature. Nature, specifically the countryside, is an escape from the bustling industrial city and also a spiritual guide. So, he sees nature as a place of refuge, as a place of escape from the industrial city life, and nature also acts as a spiritual guide for him, right? Now, this is very important since Romanticism was a reaction against enlightenment in one way, and the scientific progress and the industrial revolution specifically, which opened up a lot of factories in England, which were throwing out soot, which were creating a lot of pollution, and trees were being cut down, people were losing jobs, life was getting very mechanical. So it was nature actually that Wordsworth thought was the place of refuge, and especially the countryside, because the city of London was extremely polluted, right? More importantly, he criticized the highly stylized language of 18th century poets and wrote in the language of the ordinary man. So Wordsworth was also kind of against the poets who came before him, right? Like the poets of the 17th century, of the Restoration age, and those writing in the Enlightenment age. So they were writing highly polished verses. Wordsworth was like a poet should write in the language of ordinary men and not write in a high style, in a style that people cannot actually understand. So he was a poet of the ordinary man. Wordsworth famously defined poetry as the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings originating from emotion recollected in tranquility. Now, this is a very memorable quote from Wordsworth, and it defines what he thinks about poetry, right? So these are among some of the points to note about Wordsworth's poetic style. Ode, Intimations of Immortality, reveals his philosophical preoccupation with the passage of time and the loss of innocence, but reinforces the enduring power of human experience. So this is like one of his popular poems, and we'll discuss it in like the slides to come. Now let's talk a bit about Wordsworth and the Romantic movement. Romanticism is an artistic and literary movement that emerged in the late 18th century and continued till mid 19th century. It laid emphasis on subjectivity, imagination, and emotions. So this is something very important to remember, because Romanticism has three specific tenets that it laid emphasis on, and that is something we see in Wordsworth's poetry as well: subjectivity, imagination, and emotion. Okay, so instead of just pure reason that the industrial revolution and like the scientific revolution that had happened in England made people think about, Wordsworth also said that emotions are equally important. You cannot always have reason, right? Kant said that it is reason that is we should be using in our daily lives to arrive at a judgment, but pure reasoning is something that Wordsworth is against, right? There, he does not want that we should only be reasoning. There was a focus on the individual, on nature, and on the celebration of the common man. Wordsworth's poetry also emphasized on feelings, emotions, and the individual. It was a movement away from formality and mannerism. For him, the primary purpose of poetry is pleasure, instituted by the expression of human emotion. Okay? It's not always to be drawing a moral from it. The theme of isolation and melancholy is also explored in his poems like the Prelude and Daffodils. Okay, now let's move on to discuss some of his major works. Lines composed a few miles above Tintern Abbey or revisiting the banks of the Wye during a tour, July 13, 1798, commonly known as Tintern Abbey, is one of Wordsworth's most popular poems. Written on his return to Wye Valley after 5 years, the poem can qualify both as a dramatic monologue and a lyrical ballad. So Tintern Abbey is something that you need to remember. I would recommend reading and understanding this poem in full if you want to understand Wordsworth. Tintern Abbey explores the theme of memory and the tranquility and solace found in the restorative power of nature. Memory helps the adult to get in touch with the experiences and emotions of childhood. So he sits by the bank of the river, thinks about his childhood, and the theme of memory and nostalgia is a prominent theme in this poem. The poem is written in blank verse and paragraphs instead of stanzas. In a world riddled with the isolation of industrialization, the poet finds peace in nature. Okay, so that is like the overarching theme of all of his work. It celebrates nature as essential to imagination and creativity. And here are some important lines from the poem. Nature never did betray the heart that loved her. 5 years have passed, 5 summers with the length of 5 long winters. Okay, and that is where he begins to talk about his childhood and all that stuff. While with an eye made quiet by the power of harmony and the deep power of joy, we see into the life of things. Right? So this is a poem that you need to study if you're studying Wordsworth. Then we have some odes that you can read about. So the Intimations of Immortality from Recollections of Early Childhood. So it's popular. It's also a very famous poem. Please read it. Themes: the loss of the divine connection to nature experienced in childhood, the enduring power of memory, and the soul's ability to transcend. Below are some famous lines. The child is the father of the man. There hath passed away a glory from the earth, though nothing can bring back the hour of splendor in the grass, of glory in the flower. Significance: often regarded as Wordsworth's greatest ode, it explores his belief in pre-existence and the spiritual decline as one matures. Okay, and then there are other odes that he's written. Ode to Duty, Ode to Licorice, Ode composed on May morning. So you can read about this by pausing the video. Lastly, let's talk a bit about the Prelude. The Prelude is his autobiographical work written in blank verse, and it was actually to be like an introduction to another work that he was writing called The Recluse, which Wordsworth never completed, right? He began the Prelude in 1798 and continued to write it throughout his life. So it began in around 1798 and it went on until he died. He didn't assign any title to it and merely called it a poem to Coleridge. It traces the history of his life from his early childhood to the point he began writing the poem. There are three versions of the poem. In the 1799 Prelude, called the two-part Prelude, composed 1798 to 1799, containing the first two parts of the later poem. The 1805 Prelude, which was found and printed by Ernest D. Sellincourt in 1926 in 13 books. So, like, this is a poem that has undergone like significant revision, and he's continued to write it. And then there are some important lines that we gotta like read about. When at my feet the ground appeared to brighten, and with a step or two seemed brighter still. Nor was time given to ask or learn the cause, for instantly a light upon the turf fell like a flash, and lo, as I looked up, the moon hung naked in a firmament. Okay. Then we have a discussion on some other poems as well. And Daffodils and the Solitary Reaper, right? So Daffodils is again like a very popular poem for those, like, I think everybody has read it as a child. Daffodils talks about the poet's loneliness after his brother's death and how he finds solace in the tranquility of a field of daffodils. It talks about finding contentment in the beauty of nature. Nature is the sublime something that inspires both awe and beauty. He focuses on emotion over analytical thought. Important lines: I wandered lonely as a cloud. For oft, when on my couch I lie, in vacant or in pensive mood, they flash upon the inward eye, which is the bliss of solitude. And then my heart with pleasure fills and dances with the daffodils. The Solitary Reaper is one of William Wordsworth's most admired poems. So it's another very beautiful poem by Wordsworth, published in 1907. It's a lyrical ballad that celebrates the simplicity of rural life, okay, life away from the city, and the power of music to transcend language and cultural barriers. The poem describes the poet's encounter with a Highland girl, reaping grain and singing in a field. Her song, incomprehensible to Wordsworth because of the language, deeply moves him. Even after leaving the scene, the memory of her song lingers with him. Behold her, single in the field, yon solitary Highland lass, reaping and singing by herself, stop here or gently pass. So this was it. You can take a screenshot of this last slide. So these are his works in chronological order, very important for a net point of view. So this was all for this video. I will come back again with more specific videos on Wordsworth's creations, like the Prelude, the poetry in general, where I will go over everything in much more detail. Please stay tuned to the channel, please subscribe, and I'll hope to bring like videos that will help you actually understand literature as it should be, instead of just making you learn for the sake of exams, right? And I hope that this channel will provide the best quality videos on English literature all over the internet. So stay tuned, stay subscribed, and yeah, again, like you don't need to subscribe right now. Look at my pace, look at what I do, and then make a decision. But yeah, do share the video if you found it great. And until I see you next, bye bye. Thank you.